Well, what everybody needs to know about Earl Marshall is that he was bred and raised by a man called W.A. McHenry from Denison, Iowa. W.A. has an interesting history himself. He was in 7 of the 10 major battles in the Civil War, had his horse shot out from under him twice, came to Denison, Iowa with $300, and by the time of his death had about 18,000 acres in Crawford County and about 20,000 in Canada.
Gee, man. And it was somewhat involved with Lincoln's process.
Yes, in the Civil War, as being part of the 8th Illinois Cavalry, he helped the New York Cavalry track down John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Lincoln, and then they followed the funeral train and guarded it back to Illinois. So if you study the history of the 8th Illinois Cavalry, it's quite a prestigious outfit.
And then becomes an Angus breeder. This is quite a story.
An Angus breeder. Yeah, and it goes deeper. His great grandfather served in the French and Indian War. His grandfather served in the Civil War, Civil War, Revolutionary War, and his father in the War of 1812. So there's a long history of service to country there in that family, but W.A. was what you might call a visionary. He wired his house, which is still in Denison, Iowa, by the way, and you can go through and tour it. It's a nice old Victorian mansion there, and he wired the house for electricity before electricity ever came because he said he knew it was going to come eventually.
Really? Well,
yeah.
He would have had to have done that in what, before 1900?
Yes, the house was built in like 1885, I believe, or 87, somewhere in there. And so it's a very unique historical building for the state of Iowa and for the Angus people as well.
I don't know how old he lived to be, Steve, but he did not see electric in that house.
No, in fact, it was gaslight. And then, but the rest of the family got to wire it up. The wiring was already there.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So the story just goes on from there. Of course, at one time he had the record of any breed for most champions at the Chicago International Show when it was there in Chicago, and then. As he got older and couldn't handle the herd anymore, and he sold it in its entirety to Escher and Ryan of Harlan, Iowa. And they, in turn, had more show winners. And the Depression hit, and the herd was dispersed like a lot of them were due to hard times. And about that same time, the trend started. These were big cattle, actually, and the trend started towards smaller cattle. And the interesting part of the story was, as far as a lot of the people involved were concerned, those cattle were lost for all eternity. And the matter of fact was there was a few old hard-nosed breeders that even stories of them buying those cows as aged cows out of the stockyards to save those genetics. And then they line bred those genetics over the next course of about 30 years. And when the Angus breed was in trouble with dwarfism and everything else, we said, what happened to those old McHenry cattle? And people started looking around, and sure enough, there were a lot of them left. And so they went to places like the Erdman Ranch in South Dakota and P.K. Pratt and W.A. Hopley here in Iowa, the Page herd up in South Dakota, up there with the McGregors.
Right.
Those people had all those cattle, and they appear in the genetics of all the modern lines of Angus cattle that aren't import or straight Y-bred.
There are no McHenrys in the cattle business today?
Brian McHenry, it'd be a great grandson. He has cattle on an acreage, but that's as close to it as they come. They are very nice people, still some family around, and they are very much interested in the history. Come back to Denison once in a while, and I've met them and talked with them, and they're very, very nice people. And if, as W.A.'s diaries relate, and the people that knew him, he was the same kind of a person. So I think it's just a great legacy for the Angus breed to have a founder like that.
Anybody doing anything with his diaries? I mean, this is a book.
Yes, in fact, Artis O'Neill, Jim O'Neill's wife, and myself are writing a book titled W.A. McHenry, The Man, the Bull, and the Legacy, and it'll be available to purchase in 2012. All the proceeds from that will benefit the Iowa juniors here because we need to build interest in these young people and encourage them to get interested in the history and we have a great legacy in our area.
Speaking of legacies in the beef industry, Steve, I was just searching while you were talking about that. Another legacy in the beef industry is Dr. Harlan Ritchie. Obviously, spent a lifetime Michigan State University. I found a PowerPoint presentation that he gave, and he point blank says the most influential. And by the way, he would have had to have given this quite a while ago.
I believe back in the 70s.
Yeah, it was 77.
Yeah.
He names Earl Marshall the most influential Angus sire to ever walk.
Yeah, and I think the association numbers bear that out. The interesting thing about that story, too, is Earl Marshall was shown, but he was beaten every time he was shown by his maternal half-brother, a bull called Black Cat Bertram. But Black Cat Bertram's progeny never get off the ground, and Earl Marshall's, as quick as they hit the ground, they knew that they had something special, and the story just spread from there. I think it's kind of a story that's one of a kind in the annals of livestock breeding. You don't find too many like it. Once in a while, but not too often.
It says here that Earl Marshall weighed 2,500 pounds as a 3-year-old.
That could be. I know Quality Marshall weighed the same. That would be a son of Earl Marshall. A lot of those cattle were bigger. I have the on loan to me the herd book from the Page herd up in South Dakota. The McGregor, Kim McGregor managed. And one of the cows in the notations, it says weighed 1450 in Rapid City. So these cattle were ahead of their time as far as size in the Angus world, and they were pre-potent cattle. I mean, they bred on, and the old masters knew about line breeding, and that's something that I think people need to reinvestigate because there's an art to it as well as a science. And before EPDs, before AI, before embryo transplant, they were able to accomplish this. In fact, Earl Marshall only had about 400 registered progeny total that accomplished this whole thing.
Oh, yeah, that is before AI. We tend to forget about that.
Yeah. And so they didn't have the technology we have today, and yet the whole breed evolved from that. And so I think it's interesting. Today we think we have to have 1,000 head to get a good sire summary test and a lot of those things, and yet here's 400 head that made a whole breed in the United States. And I think that's a tribute to these old master breeders, and I think there might be a little something that we can learn from them.
Yeah, if we just pay attention. W.A. McHenry, breeder of Earl Marshall. Steve Burress, obviously qualified to write the book because as I now read back what I said earlier, 1925, the bull named Quality Marshall, a son of the great breeding bull Earl Marshall, weighed 2,500 pounds as a 3-year-old. Steve, we're out of time, but this is on RFD TV, Monday night, 7 o'clock Central Time. It's called I Am Angus, and I think you've laid the groundwork here quite well. Keep me up to date on the book, and we will make people aware where they can get that.
I sure will. Thank you much.
Steve Burress joining us from Logan, Iowa. I think we left that out earlier. Once again, I am Angus, RFD TV, Monday night, 7 o'clock Central Time. I'm Trent Loos, Loose Trails and Tales, the program. Always remember, be gentle, stay firm.